About a week ago, I received a message from James Dooley, who many people don't know about. He's been one of these quiet figures in the SEO world, absolutely crushing it, making a huge amount of money, but not actually building a personal brand. So while most of you on YouTube will know all about Diggity, Jesse Cunningham, Neil Patel, Nathan Gotch, all these really big names, you always got to remember that's just the tip of the iceberg. These are the SEOs who have actually decided to step out into the limelight and build a personal brand. Whereas actually there's a huge number of really top business people who are the absolute best at grinding away, manipulating the Google algorithm, but never take that step of building a personal brand. Now, one of those is James Dooley. I encountered him a little bit in the Facebook group, seeing certain quite big people in the industry mentioning him, but never really knew anything about him. But then over time, I started to see more and more of his influence, particularly how his name was actually coming up in my Ahrefs keyword research for all sorts of interesting terms. And this was based on some interesting tactics he was using to actually influence Google auto suggest, so that when someone Googled certain phrases, his name would come up as one of the associated entities. Now, about a week ago, I received a message from him saying, "I'd love to be on your podcast." Excellent. I don't have a podcast. I thought about it very briefly, and actually hosting a podcast is really easier than it's ever been before, because all you're basically doing is having a Zoom call, recording it, and then you upload it to a podcast distribution platform. Again, that used to be quite expensive, tedious. You'd have to try and connect it to as many podcasting platforms as possible. Now it's really easy. Even Spotify, they've acquired Anchor FM, which was one of the big ones. And now absolutely free. You can sign up, distribute your podcast everywhere. And this has got a lot of SEO implications. But before we get onto that, let's just talk about podcasting as a whole. Podcasting is a really good medium for the simple reason it hasn't been abused. It takes work. It's not the first thing people think of when it comes to making money online. It's certainly got a lot more popular. But even then, if you think about how many blogs are being published every year, how many YouTube videos are being uploaded every year, and you compare that to the numbers for podcasts, and podcasting is tiny, which means you're competing in a much smaller space. But at the same time, while someone might only click onto your blog post for a few seconds, or watch a minute of your YouTube video, podcasting is very much a long form format. Your average retention time is going to be extremely long. People don't decide to listen to a podcast and just try to skip to the best bits. I know with Tim Ferriss, I might skip past the first 3 minutes to get past the product placements. But then after that, I tend to listen to the full hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. And there's definitely that convenience where you downloaded it, you're in the car, out walking, something like that. That's someone who, without you doing anything, is spending a lot of time with your voice and your insights. So podcasting is already a good thing to do. It's definitely been on my list for a while, not a massive priority. I actually own a podcast and as one of my online businesses, but I made sure that I don't actually appear anywhere on it. So I hired a host, hired a team to run it. And so it's basically working away in the background without me having to do anything. So I've got a team reaching out to good people to interview. They're coming on the show, and then my host will host it, run it, be the face of it, and then publish it. And then I'm just working away in the background, trying to rank it and get that engagement up. So how you actually chart on podcasts is all about engagement. So as soon as your episode live, you want to get as much engagement on that as possible. So we're talking favorites, downloads, listens. If you can do all of that within a short amount of time, you should be able to get that podcast to trend and rank within the podcast stores very well. And if you can, then of course you end up being distributed to far more of the platform. You can discover huge audiences that way. Now, perhaps one of the biggest advantages of podcasts, especially the interview format, is actually positioning. So I've seen this done incredibly smartly before. One perfect example is actually Stephen Bartlett, the Diary of a CEO podcast. And this has been repeated through all sorts of different people. I know someone, Nick James, who runs a company called Expert Empires. They have a conference I'll be speaking at next year. And he's basically made his business to be talking to business leaders and working out their tactics and distributing those teachings and tactics to his audience. So whether it's on stage at a conference or online on the podcast, he is always there side by side with these really big figures talking to them. And therefore his own authority, obviously in terms of perception, receives a massive boost because they're talking as if they're equals. In that situation where he's the host, you could even argue that the host is arguably elevated above the person he's speaking to. So the higher quality of guests you can get on, that's a good way to actually leverage your own authority. But from a purely SEO perspective, there are a lot of benefits to podcasts that a lot of people don't realize. One of them is backlinks. So when you distribute that podcast, it goes all those different podcasting platforms, and the show notes will actually link back to your site and get you a huge amount of power. Here's one of my clients where before they even started with me, they already had a lot of good links because they had a podcast. And so they had links from podcasters.spotify.com, podcast.google.com, tunein.com, castbox.fm, player.fm. If you start a podcast and you distribute it, you get all these links automatically. Now, yes, they're no follow links, but they're up in the 80s and 90s. So why wouldn't you do that? All you have to do is publish one episode, get it distributed through your hosting platform, and you'll easily pick up about 10 links from that. I know plenty of people in the SEO industry who, if they're launching a niche website or another project like that, they will simply publish one episode of a podcast just to get those links into the site. It's a really good EEAT, expertise, experience, authority, and trust. A signal to Google that you're a proper brand, proper person. So those links are definitely helpful. So if you can't be bothered with hosting a podcast, all you need to do is go to 11labs.io and you can use potentially you can use the free text-to-speech generator, or you can sign up for a plan. I've cloned my voice with that, so you can actually clone your voice. And if you've got any blogs, anything like that, upload that text to 11labs, download it as a podcast episode, upload that to the distribution platform, and then you're done. You have a podcast without having to do anything. However, if you can be bothered to go to the extent of actually running a genuine podcast, whether it's yourself being the host or you can hire a host, remember, all you need is someone who's able to be good on camera and ask good questions. You can potentially give them the questions to ask, but basically your key interview screening question for that role is, can you hold a conversation? Can you engage with people? Obviously, a lot of people can't. Plenty of people can. So you don't need an expensive host. But if you do go down that route and you're able to deliver guests a really good experience, then the chances are you can actually ask them for a link. You can say, here's your podcast episode, give them basically a media kit where they can basically say, I was featured on this podcast. And so from that, this is on the podcast that I own, we've been able to get some good links back into the site. So we've got one DR42, one DR21, a 7, and a 15, and that's absolutely free. These are 6 backlinks that money probably can't buy. Obviously, I run a link building agency, so I generally believe in the power of paid link building at high volume. But if you are able to get links like this from your podcast guests, the chances are they're not going to be linking out to anyone else particularly. So you've got some truly unique industry relevant links there. But here's what I really wanted to share with you, which is the power of podcasts for Parasite SEO. And this can have a big influence on what you call your podcast. So if we just search digital marketing podcast, we basically want to make sure the title of our podcast fits an existing search. Just like keyword research with Google, just like choosing a domain name, you want a keyword rich podcast name. And that's because Google really likes ranking podcasts, especially the Apple podcast link. So we talk about exact match domains in SEO. So you want your domain name to be the keyword. The fact is, if your podcast name is the keyword, you're going to do really well. So in this case, we're just looking at digital marketing podcast. So having had the interview with James Dooley, I'm trying to work out what is the SEO Jesus podcast going to be. And I noticed my friend Craig Campbell, he doesn't call his SEO. He goes for the Craig Campbell Digital Marketing Podcast. And I thought, I know what he's done there. He's targeting digital marketing podcast, because although we're both big in SEO, generally our main audience is actually, we don't want people who are already grinding away there. We want people who don't even know what SEO is, who have just started a business and want to find the best way to grow online. And we want to give them that gift of SEO as a message. So for us, targeting digital marketing actually makes more sense. So in this case, digital marketing podcast gets 450 searches per month in the US, global volume 2000, got quite a high CPC. And that's really interesting because this guy, Search Laboratory, this is a sponsored article. So they're actually paying to get this traffic. So it's clearly very valuable. But if we come down just a little bit, we have podcast.apple.com with the digital marketing podcast on Apple Podcasts. And then right underneath, that same podcast has got the digital marketing podcast on Spotify. Plus, podcasts are really good for knowledge panels. So this one also has its own knowledge panel. So this is just one podcast that's managed to completely dominate the top of page 1 for digital marketing podcast. That's taking out all the search features within podcasting platforms, whether it's Spotify or Apple. Even without all of that, just from Google, they're getting a significant amount of traffic. So I've just dropped in my WAV file. So it's the audio version from the script. You can export the audio version much faster than the full version. That's uploading here. Episode description. So I've uploaded it to YouTube. So I'm just going to take my existing description from there. And remember, wherever you go, you want prominent calls to action, partly for the link back to your site, even if it's a no follow link, but also just calls to action for your audience. As much as you can, try and include calls to action within the actual media. So when I'm doing YouTube videos, I tell my audience to go visit this site, do this, do that. Links in the description are easily forgotten. They do work, but obviously most people won't scroll down that far. Podcasts, even more so. If someone's listening on their commute or out for a walk, they're not going to be on their phone scrolling through the show notes. So make sure you tell them what they need to do in the actual audio. But still, episode description, you want this to be rich. It even supports HTML. So it looks like you can get some headings and things like that in there potentially. I'm actually over the to limit here if we do HTML, but this seems fine. So again, you want long form SEO optimized content there. With these types of platforms, wherever you get a text field, whether it's the podcast description, the show notes. Doesn't matter where it is, you might as well optimize it, so include your keywords. So then we go next. We're often for Q&As and polls. I'm not going to worry about those for now. And we're still only at 94% upload, but once that's gone through, we'll be able to publish and then distribute to all those platforms. Now, once that episode is uploaded, you'll have a shareable link for Spotify and various other platforms, but the crucial one is Apple Podcasts, and that doesn't happen by default. So you want to go and submit a show for Apple Podcasts. There's a guide here. So it says go to Apple Podcasts Connect, and basically podcasts work all through RSS feeds, really simple syndication. So now I'm into Apple Podcasts. I go to add new and click add show, and then add show with an RSS feed. So captions is now complete. So we've now got a load of short form reels that can be shared to TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. And crucially, you can see captions actually assigns a virality score that does seem to be quite accurate in terms of just how good that little soundbite is. We'll say unfortunately, in the NLP, we have your competitors on there.
So yes, it's just a link building agency, but as you know, links don't work if they're not top authority or your content starts from scratch. When someone starts with us in month one, we'll try and do everything we can basically to improve their existing content and fill those topical gaps. But often get some gentle pushback. We go for that minimum content score of 70, but they'll say, you've mentioned our competitors. And we'll say, unfortunately, in the NLP, we have your competitors on there. So if the example I always give is the best business coach, you better mention Tony Robbins, otherwise Google is going to see your articles incomplete. Google's only a machine, so they don't work if they're not top authority or your content.
There you go, really easy way just to smash your YouTube link in and get loads of short form content. Now the point of that is you can use that in your pre-launch sequence and basically just get as much traffic as you can on those platforms like Instagram and Facebook, so you can then drive people to the long form version and therefore get that ranking better. However, in the meantime, the upload is now finished. So we have this RSS feed link here, which means we can now go to Apple Podcasts and we go to new show. We want a new show with an RSS feed, to our RSS feed URL in there. And now this will populate all the information we've already uploaded to Spotify/Anchor. Another big one is Amazon. So just do add your podcast. And then once again, we just submit the RSS feed here. So now that's all populated in Apple Podcasts, we can simply select publish. And there's a few things you need to fill in on here. You need the email address so that other platforms can verify you. Update frequency. This one I'm going to say no set schedule. And that's now published, which means Amazon should go through. Okay, now the main thing we're actually interested in this is this Apple Podcast URL. So I'm going to copy that. And just to verify that, let's view that in incognito. So we can see this is my, if you like, Parasite page. Got the H1 SEO Jesus AI Digital Marketing Podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts. We've got some content here. We can keep adding content here. Obviously, it's got lots of related internal links on the same page. So now we're going to head over to Money Robot and drive some tiered links through automation. So for that, we're going to use Money Robot. I'll leave a link below. So we just do new campaign. We'll do high competition. Money site URL is the podcast URL. Keywords to rank for: SEO podcast, digital marketing podcast, AI podcast. Then create unique articles using Money Robot Builder. Okay, now that's good to go. So what that's going to do is drive a load of automated links to this page because, like Parasite pages, like I normally talk about, Google's not going to take down Apple Podcasts for acquiring dodgy links. So let's just compare with this with the digital marketing podcast just to see if they're doing anything else. So it's the exact same style of link, /podcast/title/ID, exactly the same as I've got up here. Interestingly, they've got a lot more content because they've got more episodes, so therefore there's more text on the page. Obviously, there's a character limit on the description, but these show notes look pretty good. So not actually that many episodes. So definitely worth filling up your show with plenty of episodes with rich show notes. And then they also have some reviews. They've actually got 178 ratings here. So I wonder if there's actually a way to game this. Now, I suspect I'm trying to work out how much of this is actually readable to Google, because here the URL changes. Not really, so it's still the same URL, we just have a different tracker on the end. So I wouldn't be surprised if Google could actually see a lot of these show notes and a lot of these reviews, as in the actual text, the actual content, which is all going to add to that overall on-page score. So, like I say, it'd be good to populate a few more episodes, and I suspect these reviews are also playing a part as well. So I'm now going to go away. We've done the basic level. So targeting digital marketing podcasts, AI podcast, SEO podcast. We're running tiered links through automation using Money Robot, but we're also going to do the more legitimate white hat path of it's a high quality podcast We're going to repurpose the content and drive clicks to the podcast that way, so that the podcast gets lots of engagement and actually ranks in the podcast store.